On today's Seventh Circle Gaming, we analyze a game from a franchise that I honestly said I never ever analyze ever since even before starting the channel. The games are simply far too big and time consuming, but we're going to analyze one of them now. And the game that we're going to be looking at is the Total War 3 Kingdoms game. We begin in our usual manner though with the full disclosure. And as always, pause the video now and read through this at your leisure, or if you prefer not to, we are going to move right into the screenshots. Now, first screenshot that we have to share with you is illustrative of what the game world looks like from, say, the 50,000 foot view. What we want to draw your attention to in particular are the facts that the user interface is centered around the upper left and the bottom right corners of the screen. At the upper left are going to be found the economic indicators as well as the notifications bar. On the lower right hand corner of the screen are a couple of other map modes, some other interactable buttons, and the next turn button. And on that, we will move on to our next screenshot. And as much as the Total War games are a battle simulator, they are also a kingdom management simulation. And in the Three Kingdoms game, the research tree for each kingdom is reflected in a screen very much like what you're seeing now. This, I believe, comes from Cao Cao, but it's illustrative of the general principle. Each of the items on that bonsai tree, what I presume it is supposed to be, represent technologies or bonuses for the particular faction. Moving on then to another aspect of the family or kingdom management side of the game. This game comes from Cao Cao, and this is the dynasty management area of the game. It also functions as the court management portion of the game. Not too dissimilar to other games that are in the grand strategy genre. Moving on now to what is normally our first screenshot that is illustrative of the game world in and of itself. We're looking at something like the 2,000 foot view, roughly, and what we're seeing is a very realistically rendered, although with some artistically rendered touches, like the borders of the map and the movement ranges are all represented with a sort of watercolor paintbrush style. With that, though, there is much more to say that we haven't already said. At the 50,000 foot view, the user interface isn't overly changed. So let's move on to the battle management screen, which is another one of the the three forks of the game. And we don't see very much that is different to other games of the Total War genre, except for the fact that there are what we're going to call company commanders, which are characters in the game and can be recruited or let go of or can be injured. So since that is the only major change from other games of the Total War genre, Total War franchise, rather, it's not quite a genre yet, but we'll have to see about that. Let's move on to our next screenshot, which is the unique aspect of the Total War 3 Kingdoms game, which is the Dynasty mode, which in other words is a horde survival mode, wherein the player must survive several waves of enemies before reaching a boss wave, and then defeating that boss before moving on to the ultimate boss of the wave. The player can select from any character that they have unlocked or purchased in the game for use in the Dynasty mode. Moving on then To our first chapter proper, which is Immersion. Here, Total War 3 Kingdoms has earned a 13 out of 15. As we've already seen, the game will be attempting to get players invested into the game world through presentation. It is told in a top-down isometric with zoomable perspective viewpoint. The world seen already is a realistically rendered world with some artistic touches like the before-mentioned watercolor style. The game will also be attempting to get players invested into the game world through player agency. This is a major aspect of the game. Players will influence the development of not only their realms, but of the world and the outcomes of battles through the choices that they make. Not only of their kingdom management, but of which character that they are going to play through the game with, because each of the characters are fairly unique. The game will be also attempting to utilize statistics focus to get players invested into the game world. In fact, there are a plethora of statistics for players to examine at their leisure. By default, the game will present things as a bar graph, though this can be changed through the settings menu. Finally, the game will be attempting to utilize story to get players invested into the game world. Although primarily this will take the form of emergent storytelling, there are going to be specific points throughout a playthrough where the game will interject a story based on the Romance of the Three Kingdoms novel. Moving on now to difficulty. Here the game has earned a 3 out of 15. The user interface, as we tried to illustrate earlier, was very complex, with a lot of different interactables and notifications for players to pay attention to. There are going to be a lot of tooltips that will pop up if the player selects the option for this is their first or second Total War game. The player selects that they do not wish any tooltips activated by default, those will not appear. However, the player can select to activate or can choose to activate those voluntarily. The difficulty options are basic only, easy, medium, hard, etc. And the options and what those are going to do for the gameplay are not necessarily described. Now, each player character has a difficulty rating, but how exactly that's going to interact with everything else in all of the other options is not described either, leading the player to do a lot of learning by doing. And so, for that reason, the game is earned a 3 out of 15. It's a lot of show but don't tell. And with that, we need to move on to The Last to Appeal. Here, the game is earned a 6.5 out of 15. While there are many characters to choose from with a lot of unique mechanics and fairly unique visual styles and unique buildings, etc. Well, the game can be played on a couple of different difficulty settings for the player to select from. There's also the option of playing through the game in the romance mode, which is much more of a superhero type story, or the records mode, which is more realistic and historically based, like what the game calls a traditional Total War experience. There is also the addition of the Horde Survival mode that we mentioned earlier, which the game calls Dynasty mode. So there's a lot of options to play through the game with. That's the overall point there. There is a significant amount of DLC available, and these are going to add additional player characters and time periods to start from. There are mods available for the game through the Steam Workshop and presumably more through the Total War Creative Assembly interface. Now, there are, however, on the other hand, a significant amount of items to manage, which may overwhelm players that are not overly familiar with the Total War or grand strategy games. On our final note, we will say that familiarity with the source material, or at the very least, the characters involved in the game, will influence the lasting appeal. So if the player has no idea who Cao Cao or Cao Hudun or Tai Chan are, they might not experience as much lasting appeal as the player who does. Moving on then, you do need to compile everything into an overall score. Overall, Total War 3 Kingdoms has earned a 7.5 out of 15. While there are several options to engage with the software, in fact we did find a lot of them, not only the player characters, but the records or the romance mode or the dynasty mode. The game does depend on players' familiarity with the source material or the characters involved therein for it to be a more immersive game. The game is also very complex and that may overwhelm some players that are not familiar with the franchise or the genre in and of itself. Finally, a highly subjective statement here, so get those grains of salt ready and thread them over both shoulders. The game is the first of the new Total War franchise with a lot of the new customizations and the new options enabled. So, players that are very interested in experiencing a new Total War game for a budget price may be interested in picking up this game. However, if they are not overly familiar with the source material, we would suggest looking into a Total War game that the player is much more familiar with the time period or the source material for, be it the Iliad, the Odyssey, or the Napoleonic era. And with that, there really isn't anything more to say about Total War 3 Kingdoms, so we will just say this is the end of the video. Thanks very much for watching all the way to the end. If you did, congratulations, and we look forward to seeing you on the next video. Stop off now from 7th Circle Gaming. Goodbye.